the cloud. There we go. All right, so those of you tuning in after the fact, Elena to thank for this recording, or else we may well have gotten to 6 o'clock without me pressing record. So do send her your thanks. She's accepting referrals all day long as a thank you. All right, so number 29. So if you remember, we had gotten right through to actually hitting the home inspections, right? Attending and working through the home inspections, through the home inspection, and then of course the septic inspection. And so 29 starts us off. Let me ask you this: any questions from yesterday up until 29? Anything that we went through that you want to clarify? Anything you'd like me to any questions you want me to answer on that?
Rick?
Yes, Eric.
Yeah, I have to ask it again. I'm still a little confused about what checks or which checks are going where. So to the buyer's attorney, to the seller's attorney, the earnest money, the deposit. If you could quickly repeat that, please.
Yeah, sure. And I'll make it as I'll kind of boil it down to 2 bullet points, right? Bullet point number 1: most of the time, most of you will have your buyers write their earnest money checks payable to their own attorney, the buyer's attorney, as trustee. That's most of you, most of the time. The exception to that is if you happen to be working outside of Fairfield County and the listing agency is located outside of Fairfield County. In times like that, most of those listing agencies are looking for the earnest money check to be written to them as trustee. So those are really the 2 opportunities you have. Your buyers you're never writing it to the seller's attorney. You're no longer writing it to Keller Williams as trustee. So it's one of the 2. You're either writing it to the buyer's attorney, which again, for most of you is most of the time, and outside of Fairfield County, if the listing brokerage, if the listing is in Fairfield County and the listing brokerage happens to be outside of Fairfield County, you may need to write that to the listing agency, which by the way is different than the listing agent, right? Let's just be clear about that. We're never writing checks to an agent, right? The listing agency as trustee. Both checks get written to whomever as trustee. Does that?
Hey Rick, so is it buyer's or the seller's brokerage if it's not going to the attorney?
Listing brokerage. So it's either the buyer's attorney or the buyer's attorney or the listing brokerage, right?
All right, perfect. Thank you.
And that's just the first deposit. The second deposit goes to attorney no matter what, right?
Yes, unless there's something else in the deal that makes it different, unless noted specifically in the contract. any additional monies are being handled by the attorneys. And again, if you remember, one of the things, guys, I mentioned is as soon as the schedule allows, which is now going to be Monday, I believe, I absolutely will put a forms class on the calendar for the offer to purchase, the purchase agreement, and the 4-page contract, and then we'll go through all of that and where those monies go and whatnot, step by step by step. Any other questions before we dive back in? Oui, madame, Elena.
Is it okay if I don't attend septic inspection or the general inspection, or does the agent need to be there? If I can't attend as buyer's agent, do I need to ask somebody of our crew to cover it, just in case? Just want to know.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And my answer to that is yes. If you can't be there personally, you really should get some coverage. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It's a representation issue, right? The buyers need or should have representation at the inspections for the reasons that we talked about yesterday. Either you helping them understand what the inspection is what the inspector is saying, and or answering any questions that the inspector may or may not be able to answer, not about the house per se, but about transactional related stuff, and about how sometimes I find buyers ask questions in an inspection about, well, what do we do now that the inspector found a rotten piece of wood on the deck, right? You don't want the inspector answering those questions. So I think you need to be there for those reasons from a representation perspective. But I also believe that you need to be, because in a lot of scenarios, the inspector is not a licensee. So either it's an access issue, or if someone is in a house, as we spoke about at length yesterday, if someone's in a house with buyers, that person needs to be a licensee. And many of our inspectors are not licensees. And so the inspector just going there with the buyers, there's now no real estate licensee present. And so that can become problematic as well.
What if the buyers are not there? Sometimes my buyers don't go to inspections, they just read the reports. Do I need to be there anyway?
Yeah, and so that's personal opinion is if you can be there in place of them, yes. Simply again, because you're the one who's going to be to be negotiating any inspection items. If nobody's there, here's what I've learned. The inspection reports, right? For those of you who have either ever had an inspection or worked through a transaction where there was an inspection and actually read the report, if you weren't at the house, you would think what you were buying by just reading the report, right? Because the reports are written in very specific ways, and they're written from a CYA perspective, right? You understand CYA, right? They're written from a CYA perspective, cover your assets for the inspector. And so oftentimes I just inspected 3 properties on Monday. And I don't go to my own inspections anymore. I do send my property manager as my representative, and he kind of gives me he knows the things that bug me, and he knows the things that that I don't really care about. And so he'll give me my version of what the inspection is. But I'm going to tell you what, you get the reports and you read them. And again, had I not actually known what I was purchasing, the way that some of these reports read, you'd think that the property was, burnt down, abandoned, whatever, or just needs to be burned down, right? And so I think it's important that somebody's there to help interpret. And if the buyers aren't there, again, as part of that service, to be there in their stead, I think makes a lot of sense. And there's not necessarily a rule for or against, again, except if it's an access issue and or a licensee being present issue. And yet, I do think it's a good idea to have somebody on the buyer's side present for all those reasons.
Yeah, but this is COVID time, so it's 3 people in one crowded space inside. So I actually did not attend my one last inspection. And I advised my buyer to leave his spouse at home, and actually he didn't go. He didn't turn up. So we looked at the report. But so I wanted to know, that was in my previous life. Want to know what you guys are covering.
Well, and you bring up a good point, right? Because there are some inspectors who have certain rules about how many people and whatnot. And so remember that your buyers and you get to decide whether or not the inspector that's been chosen, because there is no like state law about how many people can be at an inspection, right? That's not how this works. How it works is there are some inspectors who will say, based on current protocols, I would prefer to only have one person with me at the inspection from the buy side and the buyer's agent, right? So there's 1, 2, and 3 people. That's an inspector's call. That's an inspector's decision. Like the Connecticut Association of Realtors didn't all of a sudden pass a rule that says, here you go, this is how inspections must be done, right? So if in fact there are more people than either you or the inspector are comfortable with, I think I would still be there, and maybe I wouldn't necessarily be joining the party, right? But I would still be around to answer questions. So I'm going to hang out in the kitchen while they're doing over here. I think there are ways to keep the numbers down and safe, and still get the job done, right? So that's my 2 cents on it. And again, my example that I give all the time in scenarios like this, where I had a conversation about 3 or 4 weeks ago with an inspector who was giving one of our agents a hard time because the buyers wanted both people there, right? They're spending $900,000 on a house. They both wanted to be there to learn about how to use their house, right? Because we're going to talk in a minute about what that inspection is actually for, right? To be super clear. And I spoke to him and said, tell me what the issue is. And he said, well, we can't have all that many people in the house. I said, well, let me ask you this. The last time you went to buy food, did you go to Stop and Shop, and did you to congregate in the produce section? Like, I'm certain there were more people crowded around the apples at Stop and Shop the last time. And I don't mean to minimize the health environment that we're in at all. I think we have to look at it with realistic eyes, right? Because there are some people who readily go and shop at Stop and Shop and pick up the apples with a whole bunch of people around them, but at the same time turn around and say, I can't have more people at the inspection, right? So I just think we have to be cautious around being hypocritical and make decisions, and then be consistent about those decisions, right? The decisions can't cause us to deliver lower quality service and/or decide that suddenly both buyers can't come to the table. A year into this, most of us have learned to live in a certain way. It's why, if you've been in the market center in the last 24 hours, our market centers don't have a whole lot of blue tape on the floors anymore. For 9 months, we've lived with blue tape outlining who can be where and all that stuff. Well, 9 months in, since we're back in the offices, people get it. So yeah, that is my opinion. Feel free to disagree with it. And yet I think that from a practical perspective, my answer to that would be work with the inspectors that make decisions in a practical manner. And practical to me today means safe and flexible at the same time. Because I do believe you can be both. I believe that the last 9 months has proven to us that we can be safe and flexible at the same time. All righty. So, any other questions before with 29? Have I gotten myself in enough trouble so far in the first 12 minutes of our conversation? All right. So let's dive into 29. 29 says, once all the inspection reports are received, review them with the buyer. Right? Generally speaking, just PS, but generally speaking, inspection reports take anywhere from 48 to 72 hours to come back to us. Sometimes inspectors can get them out faster. It doesn't take typically longer than that. Generally speaking, I think within 3 days is a reasonable amount of time to receive it. Today is Wednesday. I did my inspections on Monday for all 3 of those properties. I don't have them in my possession yet. I expect them tonight or tomorrow morning, right? So that 2 to 3 day period, I think makes a whole lot of sense. Try to separate out issues that are cosmetic or minor in nature from issues that are structural, mechanical, or safety related. So let's have this conversation. I think we've had it once before, but we're going to have it one more time, right? We're going to have a conversation around what sellers statutorily need to address in their inspections. So when sellers get inspection results back, what is it that they need to address?
The paint thing, the paint. I forgot
So
what
you
it's
mean
called.
lead?
Yes,
the
yes,
paint?
the lead paint.
Okay, so lead paint. What else?
Radon, anything like that. I imagine if it had a gas tank in the basement or outside in the backyard.
Right. So environmental issues. So we broaden that to environmental issues, right? A responsibility or a statutory requirement to handle environmental issues. What else, Margaret?
Can't they just choose to do nothing, to not address anything?
Well, so there's a different perspective, right? So then the answer could be nothing. They have no responsibility. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was going to say the same as Margaret. Actually, we two minds alike. The first house I made a bid on, and actually for the record, this is like our 1-year anniversary. We bought our house right in time. The first house we made a bid on, an offer on. The seller said, you know what, you can do any inspection you want. We're not moving or changing anything. So my answer would be, they don't have to do anything. We can do inspections as much as we want.
Yeah, and that is correct, right? In the state of Connecticut, we live in an as-is state, which means you accept the property as is. Now, that doesn't mean that some sellers don't address some issues, right? But I want to be clear from, this is a whole buyer side conversation. When you are on the buyer side, and I still hear people making a mistake in discussing this with their buyer clients and setting unrealistic expectations by saying things like, well, and don't worry, because safety and health issues, or town code issues, all of those things are necessary for the seller to address. And that is just simply not true. The seller, as many of you mentioned, can simply say, you know what, I'm out. I'm selling the house to you the way it is. We live in an as-is state. Now, somebody asked me recently, what if it doesn't say as is on the MLS listing? Guys, we live in an as-is state, right? The statutorily, properties convey in an as-is condition unless or until there is something that is contractually agreed upon between the buyer and the seller. Now, there are some issues that pop up that sellers are smart to address because they will likely be brought up by any buyer. And so that's where some of these conversations come in, right? Robert mentioned things like radon, right? Radon, if the radon is high, hey, here's a quick question for you. What is high radon in terms of radon in the air? Do you know how that's measured and what that number is?
Kilo something 3.0 is actionable, 5.0.
So 3.5 and something. Yes, so if you average Alex's answers, she's exactly right. It is 4, right? The number is 4, and it is measured in picocuries per liter of air. Picocuries per liter of air. And so anything over 4 picocuries per liter of air. And what is it in the water? Anybody know what the water measurement is?
I'm gonna take a guess, 3.
So it's a good guess. It's an incorrect guess, but it's a good guess.
I still
5,000.
want to guess 5.
5,000.
5,000.
Right? It's measured differently in the air and the water. So 4.0 picocuries per liter of air, 5,000 picocuries per liter of water. Those are the EPA suggested action numbers. Now let me ask this question because we're going to stay on this for a little bit. What if the radon comes in at 8 picocuries per liter of air? What is the seller's responsibility? Right, it's double what the EPA says should be actionable.
You should disclose it.
Yeah, there's still no legal responsibility by the seller to have to take action on that. Now, the point I made before is that if in fact it comes in at 8 and the seller says no, and the buyer says, well, we're not buying the house, and another buyer comes along and does another radon test, and it reads 8 again, right? The seller may have a struggle at some point with some of these items because most buyers are going to ask for some kind of mitigation around that, right? And so, from a buyer's agent perspective, I will tell you, I worked with some buyers who said, you know what, I don't care about radon. I don't, so let me ask this, is radon a health concern?
Yes.
Okay, we have a
Depends on who
yes.
you ask.
Depends on who you ask. Yeah, I'm going to side with Jerome on that one, because if you Google health issues radon, you'll get 1,000 websites that tell you that, you know, radon will kill us all. It just is a matter of time. And you'll have another 1,000 websites that say it is the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on the real estate industry, right? And so, and everything in between. So here's the answer. As buyer's agents, the answer for you is you don't address whether it's a health concern or not. You can have your own personal opinion. You're just not going to share that opinion. The conversation that you get to have around radon is a business-based conversation. And what I mean by that is if I represent Jerome and the property tests for radon in the air at 8.0, right? We'll have a conversation that says, so all right, Jerome, the EPA says 4 and above is actionable. The seller has no legal obligation to address it. We can ask for mitigation or not. My thought for you is, if you purchase this house and we don't ask for mitigation, and 3 or 4 years from now you go to sell this property and the number reads the same, most buyers are going to ask you to mitigate. So let's see if we can't get this mitigated on someone else's dime prior to you purchasing the property. And if not, then you'll have a decision to make as to whether or not you spend the money on your dime to mitigate. But that's the conversation that we get to have. If Jerome says, well, what do you think? Can we live in the house even one day with with radon that high? Will I move my kids in and will they start dropping like flies at like the first weekend? The answer is, you know what, unclear. Unfortunately, I'm not a medical expert, and so how radon ultimately affects us, whether or not it's a health condition or not, I'm going to leave to the experts. However, the business decision is to see if we can't get to mitigate on your behalf prior to the close, and or you can choose to mitigate it after the close. Do you see the distinction I'm making here? I know there's a whole bunch of hands, but let me get through this first. Do you see the distinction I'm making between having a conversation around something that you're not necessarily qualified to have a conversation around versus, and even, so what if you're a medical doctor and a real estate licensee? So now all of a sudden you feel as though you have this knowledge to impart because you've done some research and you found that this is what radon can cause. Guess what? You're not bringing your medical expertise to the table when you're a real estate licensee. So now I'm going to give you, right? You should write this down because it's a really important script that will save your behind more times than I can count. And that is a great question, Mr. and Mrs. Client. Unfortunately, that is outside of the scope of what I am licensed to assist you with. Let me point you in a direction to get better information on that. Right? That is outside of the scope of what I am licensed to assist you with. For some reason, real estate licensees struggle saying those words. Right? And it's not really a mystery as to why. You want to do a good job. You want to perform at a high level. You want to help people make good decisions. I get that. Just remember, your expertise is real estate, not anything else. So when it falls outside of that specific expertise of real estate, the answer is, unfortunately, that is outside the scope of what I'm licensed to assist you with. Let me point you in a direction. Yes.
What if it's a case where, obviously you just mentioned it, but I just need a little clarity. Let's just say you're a CPR with that person, you're creating that personal relationship and it actually came up that, you are actually, a doctor and, or you're licensed in that field to give them information on that. How do you address something like that?
So again, in my world, so let me ask you this, Donald, are you a doctor?
No, but for argument's sake, let's just say I am.
Okay, all right. So argument's sake, go right back to where we were, and that is in this scenario, You are licensed as a real estate professional assisting someone in buying a property. They didn't contract with you for medical advice. And so regardless of what other information you might have or what other licenses you might you might hold, when they contract with you on that, then you're free to give them that information. However, I would encourage you never to be contracted with somebody for more than one thing. And I'll give you a different example. Sometimes we have real estate agents who are also attorneys, right? And so if you are a licensed attorney, you may know more about contracts than the typical realtor. However, if you're working with a buyer and they ask you a contract question, but they're represented by another attorney, they haven't hired you as an attorney in that scenario. They've hired you as their real estate professional. And so when it comes to contractual conversations, you're going to defer. That is outside of the scope of what I'm licensed to assist you with. I'm going to defer that conversation to your attorney, who's not me. Right? And if someone ever says to you, okay, you know what, because you're a realtor and an attorney, I want to hire you to do both, you say, thank you so much. I so appreciate your trust. I think the best to serve you at the highest level, it is in your best interest to choose which of those two areas you'd like my assistance in. I'm happy to either be your realtor or be your attorney, just not both. I'm happy to be your realtor or your doctor, just not both. Yes? Have we beat this horse good and dead?
Yes.
Any other questions, comments,
Yes.
concerns? Yeah, go ahead.
Who, me or Alex? She's also.
Elena.
Okay, Alisa, can you please be quiet? Sorry. So I have a question. Radon, my buyers are very concerned. So preventively, we don't know if there is radon. Can I put this in the contract that if radon is found, the seller to mitigate it?
Sure.
Thank
Sure,
you. That's what I did at 11 p.m. yesterday. I didn't want to ask you at 11. So I did that. Thank you.
Well, no worries. And here's the good news. You can always ask me anything at 11, 12, 1, 2 in the morning. I won't answer you until 6 o'clock the next morning because by the time it's 11 o'clock, if you're up working, I'm not, I'm asleep already. So, but recognize that anything that's agreed upon between the buyer and the seller, which is then solidified in a contract, is valid, right? So that's just a negotiable discussion. Because when you present that contract, the seller could say, you know what, I accept all of these terms, except I'm rejecting this one. I'm not agreeing to preemptively say yes to mitigate radon. Or they say, you know what, I'm sure it's not a problem. I will say yes to that. But they get an opportunity in that contract to read it and say yes or say no. So that's just a negotiable item, right? Does that help that? Excellent. Alex, I'm sorry, you had your hand up and I ignored it. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, I'm used to it. That was a joke, Rick.
Oh, I missed it. You said you were what?
Used to it. I'm accustomed to being ignored by you.
Got it.
Just to wrap this up with a bow, I think it's important that everyone understand that mitigating, no matter who does it, if in fact they do want to do that, is not $1 million item. It can be just in the neighborhood of $1,000. And, that's part of those conversations.
Yeah, indeed. Right. It's typically it's a $1,200 item that we're talking about. And so for in most scenarios, right, to argue over $1,200 seems a little silly to me at some point, right? On both sides, frankly, on both sides, right? When you're spending $500,000 or $600,000 or $800,000 or $900,000 on a house, at some point, everyone just has to kind of choose to get along. And so Margaret says a seller can also offer a credit and not to deal with it directly. So indeed, right, that's another way that it could be handled. All right, so there's our radon discussion for the afternoon. Woohoo! And where we got off on that was in number 29, because yes, we are still on number 29. The idea, the strategy to move everyone forward in terms of agreeing to inspection items is to help the buyers understand. Again, some of this happens earlier when you're prepping for the inspection, and it happens again here, is to set proper expectations about why inspections are done. Right? Inspections are not done so that the inspectors are not there to hunt out all the stuff that's wrong with the house. Right? And it's funny to me how a lot of people, both licensees and not, believe the reason you hire an inspector is to find all the stuff that's wrong. And that's not the reason inspectors are hired. Inspectors are hired to spend time with the new owners of a property to show them the ins and the outs. To me, it's like a how-to couple of hours that the inspector spends with the buyers to show them how to use their new property. And sometimes in the course of doing that, they can uncover something that may be an issue or something that they bring to someone's attention. So helping your buyers understand what the purpose of the inspection is an important part of this conversation, right? To set proper expectations. Because if you're not setting expectations up front and buyers have it in their head that this is just another round of negotiations based on this big long list of things the inspector is going to find, in this market especially, they're going to be severely disappointed, right? Severely disappointed. And so even in a more normal market, I encourage you to wait till everything comes back in so you're not doing everything piecemeal, right? Because that's annoying, right, for everybody, especially to the listing agent and the seller, right? To hear back from you and say, well, we would just like to have this handled. And the seller say, okay, you know what? I think we can make that happen. And then 2 days later, the septic report comes in. Oh, and we also need the distribution box replaced. And then a day after that, the radon report comes in. Oh, and we also need the and at some point you're irritating everyone because you're doing it piecemeal, right? The sellers end up thinking, okay, so what does tomorrow bring? Like what else? What other reports are outstanding? Can you give us a heads up so we know? So from your perspective with the buyers, you're going to wait until all those reports come in, or at least a majority of them come in, and sit down with the buyers at that time and go through them. You're going to separate out things that are cosmetic in nature or lower on the list. Make sure you're reminding them that they're buying a used house. They're not buying a brand new house most of the time. It's a used house. And just like when you buy a used car, even if you spiff it up and call it certified pre-owned, it may still not be exactly like it was when it was new. There may be some wear and tear. There may be a scratch or a little dent, right? And that's what happens in a used house. Interestingly enough, our certified pre-owned cars that we buy 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years old are nothing compared to the 50 to 100-year-old houses that we're buying, right? When was most of the inventory in Fairfield County built?
Post-war.
1900s.
Post-war is exactly right, right? Most of the inventory in Fairfield County was built between like 1905 and 1980, 1975, something like that. That 30-year period of time, that's most of our inventory. Well, I can tell you 1970 is almost 51 years ago.
It's ancient. Oh,
I can tell you very specifically why I know that. Right? And so the idea of 50 plus years ago, that's what you're buying. It's not supposed to be new. It's not supposed to be 100% perfect, right? So help them understand all of that. Help them focus, if you would, on bigger issues. If there are bigger issues, I believe that helping buyers get the most from their inspections, if in fact there's something to discuss, and if the sellers are willing to entertain it, you have far more success if you will go and say, there's one larger issue with this particular, with the deck is a complete and utter nightmare and is about to fall off the back of the house. And yes, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but we're going to handle all that because we recognize we're buying a used house, right? We're not going to ask them to update the GFI outlets in all the bathrooms. because they don't exist. Well, of course they don't exist. The house was built in 1957. Why would you think they exist in the bathrooms when the house was built in 1957 and hasn't been updated? Right? So be careful about how you have conversations with your buyers and prep them for what is realistic, especially market by market, right? And the market-driven discussion today is, you know what, we're going to do those inspections. For the most part, they are for your educational purposes about how to utilize your house. Should the inspector come across issues, we'll discuss them and decide whether or not there are issues that we want to bring to the table, to the seller's attention, and see if there's a path forward with the sellers. My question to you, I want you to be thinking all along, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if the seller, who is not legally obligated to address anything that you bring to the table, regardless of health or safety or anything, if the seller says no to it all, are you still interested in pursuing this property? I want you to keep that in your head at all times. Don't ask them to think about that only when it pops up, right? Have them be making those decisions all along. The more they think about it, they're going to make decisions based on the fact that they decided to like the house enough to make an offer on it, right? Things cost enough where we live that you don't just willy-nilly decide to plop down $600,000 on a property. Some thought goes into that, right? 400,000, whatever the number is. It's still a lot of money. Alex.
So I recently had a $400,000 listing, and it became for the buyer. I guess my question is, there was an in-ground oil tank, or underground, I should say, in-ground, and the deck was kind of a wreck because it was 40 years old. Not kind of, it was. I mean, it was, you know, stable, and my question would then be, I can imagine, and this did happen, that a buyer would ask for both of those conditions to be a seller's expense. How would you handle that kind of, those big asks?
So it was the deck, and what was the other one?
In-ground oil.
Right.
This
So-
is in
so-
Litchfield.
Yeah, so here's how I would approach that, right? Because those are two very different things, right? The in-ground oil tank is a very different conversation than the crappy deck.
Mhm.
The first thing to remember is that buyers have to recognize that things that are uncovered by inspectors that were kind of right out there, if the deck is in that crappy condition, it's likely that when everyone arrived at the property and was walking out the back door on the deck and went, oh my goodness, this is in terrible shape, right? It's visible. They kind of saw that it was in a disaster. So it wasn't like when the inspector arrived and said, wow, this deck is a disaster. They went, oh, you're kidding, right? Because for the most part, that kind of stuff can be seen. It's like when windows fog up, right? When the seal gets broken on a window, and then all of a sudden the buyers come back and say, well, all these seals are broken. We need them replaced. Like, okay, you didn't notice that? Like, what, you saw that when you walked in. You didn't need your inspector to all of a sudden come out. So the way I address that as a listing agent is, you negotiated the stuff that you could see in the offer that we agreed to. The only things that the seller may choose to address are things that you couldn't see that did come up in your inspection, like potentially a buried oil. Right now, sometimes it is plausible that the current owners of the house didn't know there was a buried oil tank because they didn't get information when they bought it. At the time, they know it because they got the information passed to them when they purchased the house, and that is a disclosable issue, right? The oil tank being buried. And yet again, let's, for devil's advocate, say to play devil's advocate, say the current owners didn't really know it, and the inspector found behind some old stuff in the basement these two little lines that went out through the foundation, right? Because that's oftentimes how these things are discovered. Somebody notices something that was cut in the foundation wall that's going out, and they're oil lines, which prompts some questions and some digging, and then all of a sudden it's discovered. You know, the buried oil tank is one of those things that that's a real decision that buyers and sellers have to make. And the reason I say it's a real cause, it could be as minimal a cost as, you know, a $2,000 oil tank lift out of the ground and some landscaping. And yet, if there's leakage discovered, right, with soil testing that happened around under the tank, it could be a $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 issue, right? It could end up being an environmental disaster, right? Where all and there's a pond or a stream in the backyard, and now it's contaminating like the entire neighborhood. And so it can be nothing or everything, which is why I think that when buyers and sellers get legal advice around that kind of an issue, most buyers' attorneys will say, hey, you know what? Here's what this could be. You probably either want to pass on this particular property if the sellers are not willing to play ball, or only agree to the property to you if in fact the proper testing and either legal abandonment or lifting of the tank is done. On the seller's side, the seller's attorney is saying, look, this is a can of worms, right? Because we're going to start doing testing, and if the testing comes back with contaminated soil, I mean, this could become a really big issue. And yet the other side of that is, once it's discovered, you can't unknow it. You can't unsee it, right? You can't unring the bell. And so for most sellers in that position, just like sellers who are determined to have a failed or failing septic system, at some point when you're a property owner, sometimes the musical chairs, you're the one left standing. And when you're the one left standing, look out, because it almost always costs you money, right?
I mean,
So
I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, and also you can't unsee it, and it's the gift that's going to keep giving if you're continuing to try to sell.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah, because now if you didn't know it before, now it's a disclosable item, and so now you have to adjust your disclosures, right? And sometimes sellers say, well, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to adjust my disclosures. And then you get to say, you know what, that is your right. It's coloring outside of the rules, and yet, please note, you have a right to know the law. I am licensed under those same laws. And so I won't put my license at risk. So even if you're unwilling to address this disclosable item in your disclosures, please note that anytime anyone comes with an offer, I have a proactive duty, which is different than a reactive duty, right? I don't have to wait to be asked. I have a proactive duty to tell every single person that brings an offer about this issue, whether you like it or not, right? And so that typical conversation typically gets sellers to pay and redo their disclosures, right? Sometimes they just have to understand that, again, they're the one left standing when the music stopped. All right, 30, present in writing the inspection issues to the listing agent, call to discuss. You can provide pages if you are looking to negotiate some inspection items, provide pages from the report that support what you're asking for. Right? Sometimes you'll need additional information, but by calling in other professionals to quantify or qualify the issue. But do provide those pages. You don't need to send the whole report. That's unnecessary. Frankly, as a listing agent, it used to annoy me when people would just send me the whole report and expect me to page through and find the supporting documentation. So pages specifically along with that list. And then you negotiate the inspection issues until both parties are in agreement. And then once they are in agreement, it's a good idea to outline exactly what's agreed to and send that to both attorneys, right? So that somebody else knows what the sellers have agreed to. Sometimes they'll put an addendum in the contract. Sometimes it'll be a side contract on what the issues are, right? You want to make sure that there's no issue financing. Sometimes if the big septic issue, you maybe want to keep that out of a contract because the financing may be in jeopardy if it's in the contract. But the attorneys will handle how that is best suited to the parties. Number 33, check in with the buyer and the buyer's mortgage loan officer and be certain that that application has actually been made. Already addressed, had some who just kind of forgot to officially pull the trigger. Like they got pre-approved, we did the inspection, they're all excited they're buying a house, and then the loan officer to go ahead and actually send in the application. So sitting waiting for the appraisal to happen, but nobody knew that the transaction was going. And so, boom, right? So again, as a checklist, just check in, make sure that they've actually applied with the loan officer and that things are moving in that direction. 34, check in with the buyer and make sure that they have scheduled an appointment with their attorney to sign the contract of sale. Just like on the listing side, this is that moment in time where you're like a plate spinner. You've got to make sure all these different plates keep spinning and all these different people are doing the job that they need to do to make sure that the clients have what they need to be signing or doing or whatnot. It's a matter of keeping all the pieces moving forward so you get to a closing table. Number 35, be mindful of the dates that were laid out in the original offer. They should always attempt to meet or exceed the dates as set forth. This is an important conversation because there are a lot of agents I find that write the contract that this is when he has to come and this is when the mortgage contingency, the mortgage needs to be approved by, and then never pay attention to those dates again and think for some reason that it's somebody else's job to make sure that those dates are being met. I will tell you that it is absolutely your job on the buyer's side to make sure that you know what those dates are. You're discussing them with the buyers and discussing them with the other people involved. If it's a mortgage conversation, are you having conversations with the buyer and the loan officer to make sure we're meeting certain dates? Are you looping in the attorney if the dates are getting tight? Maybe an amendment has to be done or an extension has to be asked for, right? But please don't excuse yourself from any of that conversation. And all agents do. They just decide that, well, now it's a contract thing and the attorney will that. I think you will find yourself that you will find that you and your clients will be in some hot water. You just assume that someone else is going to handle it. You should know all those dates and everyone else should know all those dates. And if everyone else forgets, at least there was you, right? You're like the safety net underneath all of it. So make sure you have some kind of a calendar and you know what those dates are and you're having those conversations. 36, once application has been made on the financing side, checking with the buyer, make sure that the appraisal has been ordered. You're then going to meet the appraiser at the house once the appraisal is ordered. Now that may, depending on the appraisal company or the appraiser, that may be slightly different, right? So have conversations, those appraisals. I will tell you that my last 3 purchases minimally, I just went back and said, you know what, getting people these properties is very, very difficult. And so based on current circumstances, I am requesting that you simply send somebody to do a drive-by. I'm more than happy to pay for the appraisal. Just don't require an interior inspection. And the last 3 times I've asked for that, the bank has said, granted. And so the appraiser does a drive-by, produces the report, and we're all done, right? Especially if there's tenants in the house, it's so much simpler than actually having that interior inspection. So know that there are things that can be asked with current circumstances that maybe makes things a little bit simpler. Yes, Elena.
And if it's FHA, how can they check for peeling paint and their roof that they like to check?
Yeah, well, so if it's an FHA loan, that they may just say no.
Okay.
Right. But again, depending on the loan program, that may not be possible. And yet, in many other circumstances, it may be. my only point is just know that that's another tool in your tool belt, because I had someone call me a couple of weeks ago saying, I have someone who just simply cannot get the appraiser. Like the buyers are so stuck, they can't get the appraiser into the house. The sellers are struggling. There were tenants in there. And I said, okay, well, ask for a waiver. Explain the circumstances and ask for a waiver. And they went back to the bank and the underwriter came back and said, yeah, we get it. And like 2 whole weeks was wasted arguing and yelling and back and forth with the listing agent and the seller to the, it's just so unnecessary, right? If there's a struggle, use what we have, right? That's one of those like pandemic silver linings, right? You can certainly use that today to try and make things go a little simpler. It doesn't always work. And yet, if it's going to work at any moment in history, it's going to be now, right? So use it while you have it. Okay. Number 38, call the buyer, let them know that the appraisal has been done. Oh, and by the way, back in 37, if you're meeting the appraiser, have comps that justify the numbers, right? Have 3 of them, not 17 of them. 3 is the number. The best 3 sold comps that support the purchase price. Because what you want to do is you want to help the buyer obtain their financing. Right? That's the role at that point in time. You want to help the buyer obtain their financing. So you want to help the appraiser appraise the property properly. Part of the reason we do that is because today, sometimes appraisers for property locally are coming from across the state, right? Because it's just kind of this round robin appraisal management company system that Chris Dodd and Barney Frank bestowed upon us a number of years ago, right? Thank you, Chris and Barney. The whole Dodd-Frank Act made hiring your appraiser locally a thing of the past, right? And so with appraisal management companies, you don't know where you're getting an appraiser. Remember that most appraisers will appreciate privately, but could even reject publicly you handing them comps. They're all happy you did it. But no one wants to say, oh, thank you for those comps. So stick them in an envelope, seal the envelope up, and quietly, as you're having a conversation about leaving the property, you know what? I had a couple of extra. If this is any help, there you go. And just quietly scooch them on over, right? Number 39, once the mortgage has been approved, be certain that the buyers and the loan officer or the processor have a handle on conditions that need to be met in order to get it clear to close, right? So once the property, there's 2 steps here, right? You get a conditional approval and then a clear to close. Make sure that they understand what their conditions are and are working towards clearing those conditions so that you ultimately get that clear to close. Yes, Elena.
Sorry, I need to go back to the previous appraiser question. Does
Yes.
appraiser need to know that there are multiple offers on the property, or that the property might be sold over asking price? And do I need to hint how much so he appraises, or do I need to tell him if any seller concessions are negotiated? I don't know about that.
Yeah, so great question. What I would say is do a little summary with your 3 best sold comps that support the price. Do a little summary page in there, just simply indicating, you know, and by the way, having a conversation with the appraiser, I have noticed that many appraisers will kind of push back on that, right? So instead of having that conversation, I would just put it in writing and stick it in that envelope and just bullet point it down. You know, please note, if it's helpful, these buyers were one of 9 offers on the property. They already have the MLS listing, so they'll know that they're appraising something over asking, but they won't necessarily know it was multiple offers. So there were 9 other offers on the property. If you used an escalation clause, right, that said $5,000 over the highest verifiable offer, you could say, you know what, our price of $365 was because we paid $5,000 over the highest verifiable offer, and the highest verifiable offer was $360. Right, those are all helpful items for an appraiser. So yeah, give them the data that they need to make a good to conduct a good appraisal. Just don't make a big deal out of it.
Can I say the actual numbers, what the offer was, or do I just hint that it went over asking and multiple offers? I don't know how much information I can disclose to, this is financial information, I'm tight, so I don't know.
Got it. Yeah. So remember, you represent the buyers here. So any information that you have that helps the buyers achieve the goal,
I
you
represent
actually
the
have a duty
seller.
to disclose it.
I
Say it
represent
again.
the seller, for example. Now I represent the seller in my transaction.
Oh, okay. Well, so we were on the buyer side. That's why I was
Yeah,
confused. So
okay.
if you represent the seller, you know, if you represent the seller, you're typically not meeting the appraiser, right? And yet, if you are an appraiser, I mean, I guess in some circumstances you are. It's not really your job as the listing agent to provide data to the appraiser. You certainly can. And what I would say is the answer to your question is, if the seller gives you the okay to give that information to the appraiser, then certainly go ahead and do that, right? If the whole idea is we want the property to appraise, right, knowing that there were extenuating circumstances. But as the listing agent, I would absolutely just get the seller's okay. There's no reason they wouldn't give it to you for the most part, and then certainly let the appraiser know.
So my question in this case will be, so which agent needs to be at appraiser, buyers or sellers? Because appraisers call the seller's agent always.
Yeah. So what I would say is that's between you and the buyer's agent to figure out who's going to be there. As a buyer's agent, I was always at my buyer's appraisals, and as a listing agent, I was never at my seller's appraisals, right? So that's just a matter of what's reasonable and customary based on where you may be practicing. I will tell you, when I buy my properties in Waterbury, I represent myself as the buyer's agent. I'm never at the appraisals, and listing agents just expect to be there because there, typically the listing agent is going to meet the appraiser, right? So again, some of it is geographic and depends on what's reasonable and where you are. This is very Fairfield County based, Fairfield County bias, where generally speaking, the buyer is headed to the appraiser. Make sense? All right, number 40, checking with the listing agent to make sure that the inspection repairs are moving along. Remind them that the seller will need to produce paid receipts for the work that is being done right at the closing. We ask for paid receipts so that the buyer doesn't show up with something scribbled on a napkin from Uncle Joey. And look, voila, the deck is fixed because Uncle Joey came and did some work to it. Well, if Uncle Joey's just Uncle Joey and isn't some sort of a licensed contractor or has some sort of expertise in deck repair, that may be problematic. So we asked for paid receipts for that reason, to make sure that the buyers are being conveyed a property where repairs that were agreed to were done by professionals. And we also asked for paid receipts to make sure that the property conveys and the buyers don't have an issue where the contractor comes back and says, "Look, paid." And so now I'm placing a lien on the property. Right? So those are the two reasons we asked for paid. Important to make sure that the sellers have paid the bill. Number with your MCA to make sure the 1% binder check has been released. And this was written prior to us moving to a model that says we'll send the money to the buyer's attorney. So that piece you can skip. However, do check in with your MCA that an invoice services has been done. I will tell you that both market centers operate on a schedule of between 2 and 4 weeks prior to your closing. So when you produce your paperwork, if you say the closing date is March the 30th, well, sometime between the 1st and the 15th of March, for a date that's in our system as closing on the 30th, your MCA division will create and send that invoice for services. If the dates change and you don't let them know, well, then you may arrive at a closing without an invoice being sent because they didn't know it was moved up. So make sure that you keep them informed based on moving dates. 42, if there is a gap between all the above happening and the actual closing date, just like on the listing side, make sure that during that gap, you're on the phone, having conversations. You can do routine check-in. You can talk to them about transfer service. You can talk to them about getting a new license at the DMV, right? You can talk with them about if they need a source for movers or boxes or cleaners or whatever, right? Have a system in place so that if there's a 30-day period of time where not a lot's going on, minimally twice a week, you're on the phone with your buyers to make sure everything's going and you're not ignoring. A week prior to the scheduled closing, begin to set up for the actual closing day. And here's what's important about number 42 as we move into 43. If you don't do 42, which is that constant at least a week check-in during the lull period, and then all of a sudden, the week before the closing, you're hot and heavy with them again, it's a perfect way for you to send a signal. They are really just commission, right? So it's just a bad idea. Drop them and then pick them up right before you get paid. It leaves a bad taste in people's mouth, right? 1 week before, however, you are going to get a little hotter and a little heavier, and you're going to actually start taking some steps to make sure that they're prepared for closing day, having conversations with the buyer, their attorney, confirm the dates and times, making calls to the loan officer or the processor to make sure they're lined up and that the clear to close has actually arrived. Right, so it's all those check-in points to make sure that everyone's set for the closing. Number 44, arrange for the final, both with the client and the listing agent, this is the morning of or the night before the closing day. Check in with the listing agent to be sure that the lockbox is still on, right? That's an important piece. I can tell you from experience, sometimes listing agents remove lockboxes earlier than the walkthrough. I one time had a buyer who was buying in the ass end of Monroe. Do you know where the ass end of Monroe is? When you live in Ridgefield, the ass end of Monroe is way over there, right? And at that time, it felt like God knows where I was driving, right? Today, with a little more statewide experience under my belt and constant trips to Waterbury, like, it doesn't feel like the ass end anymore. But back in the day that this story happened, it absolutely felt like I was driving to another country, to that side of Monroe. And so I met the buyers in the office. They came in my car. We drove from my office in Ridgefield to Monroe to do the walkthrough. We got out. We got to the front door. No lockbox. We looked under the bushes, looked at the back. No lockbox. It was a Friday morning. I'm calling the listing agency, which was one of these small single person mom and pop solo brokerage. So it wasn't like there was people around, there wasn't a staff. It was just a small little brokerage. No one answered. I'm like, okay, so what are we doing now? And so I thought, okay, so one of two things has to happen. Either we need to figure out how to get into this house, or I've got to drive back to the broker who was in Danbury, right? So I came from Ridgefield, went to Monroe, went back to Danbury to see where the key was. Here's what I can tell you. How we solved that problem was I was relatively small and flexible. And the husband of the couple that I sold a house to was relatively strong, because I found a window in the back that was open. It was a smaller laundry room window, but it wasn't locked. So we were able to kind of slide that up. There was a screen, and I said to them, okay, look, here are our options. We can either make a little slit in the screen at the bottom and see if we can't pop the screen out. Again, this is gonna be your house in about an hour and a half, so I'm asking your permission. Or we have to drive to Danbury and see if we can get this key. Guy was like, here, use my pocket knife, right? So we, a little slit, and we fingers in, boom, pop the screen out. And then he lifted me up and pushed me in the window. So that's how we got in the house, right? Real estate is not my only skill, apparently. I'm actually good at breaking and entering as well. And we did our walkthrough. Here's the point. The point is, had I simply made a phone call to the listing agent the night before to confirm that the lockbox was still on the house, I would have saved us all of that. It's a good story later on, right? But it was a little bit embarrassing, right? Because I didn't have the data I needed to get the job done. By the way, as we were driving back to the closing, I did get a phone call from the broker saying, "Oh yeah, I took that off 2 weeks ago. The key is in my office in Danbury. Do you need it? I can meet you there in about a half hour." I'm like, "You can meet me in a half hour. We have to be at closing in a half hour." Anyway, just check. Just make sure that you can still get in the house, right, is the point. The end of 44 is crazy important. Regardless of who tells you what to do with the key at before or during or after the walkthrough, do not give the key to the buyer. Do not give the key to the buyer. That is outside of the scope of what you are licensed to help them with. If you have a key for a walkthrough, it needs to go back to an attorney or back to the listing brokerage, and the keys need to be arranged to be picked up in some other fashion. I will tell you that we've had too many instances in the last 2 or 3 years where even when listing agents said to buyer's agents, "You know what, when you take the key out of the lockbox, when you do the walkthrough, just give it to the buyers." And then an hour later, and guess what? Dry closing, the money doesn't show up. This is a true story, by the way. It just happened less ago. Listing agent said to buyer's agent, who was our agent, "Give the key to the buyer after the walkthrough," because they're just going to the closing, signing the paperwork, and then it's their house. Well, except that the buyer's money didn't show up. And so everyone said, "Okay, what are we going to do?" It was clear that it was going to be the next morning for the closing. Everyone decided 10 a.m. in the attorney's office, "Great, we'll meet this up then." And everyone went their separate ways. Next morning, the buyers show up at closing. I show up with the buyers, our agent with the buyers for the closing. And the buyer says, "Hey, I just have a quick question before we sign the papers. Is there any way to ask sellers what the trick is with the upstairs shower, because we couldn't get the hot water to come on?" And everyone's at the closing saying, "Wait, what? What are you talking about?" Well, what they were talking about was they had the key. The money didn't show up. Thought nothing about going back to the house and sleeping there that night. So woke up that morning, they had to take a shower. And had a question because they couldn't get the hot water to turn on. Do you know what massive liability that creates for everybody? For someone to be in the house and they not own it? I mean, it worked out fine. It was all innocent. And yet things like that happen when we deliver keys prematurely. So I will tell you that in almost every single scenario I can think of, the job is to get the key back to the listing agency or back to one of the attorneys. And then the buyer, even if you're going back to the buyer, back with the buyer to the closing, to hand the key to the attorney and have the attorney turn around and hand it back to the buyer, I would far rather that than it go from you to the buyer. Because then as soon as that happens, if something goes wrong, guess who's responsible for handing the key? It doesn't matter if we had a situation where the seller's attorney told our agent to go ahead and give them the key, and then something went sideways, and then the seller's attorney was furious that the buyers had the key. Like, okay, but you told that. So keep yourself safe. Don't be responsible for handing the key to the buyers. Give it to an attorney, give it back to the listing agency. Might that inconvenience the buyers? Might it inconvenience you? Yes, I'm sorry about that. But it is an absolute risk reduction technique that I wholeheartedly stand by. 45, you're going to do the walkthrough of the house, the final walkthrough, right? And why do you do a walkthrough? You do a walkthrough for a couple of reasons. It's not to negotiate something at the last minute, right? It's to make sure that the house is in the same or similar condition as the day you inspected it. That the things that were supposed to be left have been, and the things that were supposed to be removed, and that no damage was done to the house or property while the previous occupants moved out. That's the reason you do the walkthrough, right? It's not to make a list of all the things that you didn't see or the inspector missed, and now that the house is empty, oh my goodness. Right, and oh, by the way, reasonable wear and tear includes the little holes in the wall where there was a nail for, I cannot tell you how many times buyers would say to me, oh my goodness, look, this is terrible. We're gonna have to address this. Look at all the little holes in the wall. That's called reasonable wear and tear. My answer to that was, so guys, here, let's find a nail. I think, look, oh look, it fits right there. And what a perfect place for a picture in your, you can hang your version of whatever kitchen picture you want right there. You don't even have to worry about making it, like, come on, give me a break. So be careful about balancing those kinds of items. If there's something that is an issue with the walkthrough, be certain that you take photos of it, send those photos off to the attorney, and maybe give a call to the attorney as you're finishing the walk. If you're from the walkthrough to the closing, where the buyers are, you know, on the phone, so that they can start figuring out how to address it, right? All right, number 47. 47 will date this document because it says attend the closing. And for all intents and purposes, the days of all of us sitting around a table singing Kumbaya all at the closing together are over. Very much so on the listing agent side, where listing agents don't attend closings anymore. Sometimes buyers agents do attend the closing if they are told when the buyers are going to actually be signing. I do encourage it if, in fact, if it's convenient, if it makes sense. If with health protocols it's allowed or not frowned upon, right? And the only reason I still encourage it, especially on the buyer side, is that that's the day, that's the moment that you're the hero all over, right? And so to share that moment with your buyers, get a testimonial, maybe do a video testimonial for marketing purposes, right? All of that opportunity is missed if in fact you don't attend. And yet I get that most people don't attend closings with their clients much anymore, right? 48, congratulate them at the closing, obtain a written or video testimonial. I just said that. 49, follow up within 48 hours of the closing to make sure everything is okay, right? We talked when we discussed the orphan program, right? The follow-up program when you sell somebody a house is you call them within 2 days, 7 days, and 30 days. Program. Within 48 hours, they have to hear from you. Within 7 days, they have to hear from you again. And within 30 days, they have to hear from you a third time. So 3 times in the first month, in my opinion, is not too much. As a matter of fact, it's just about right. Because you've given them 48 hours to kind of move in and see if anything's wrong. Then you've given them another 4 or 5 days after that to get to that first week, and now they've lived there for a little while. So then you check in again. And then another couple of weeks later, by the end of 30 days, they've lived there for an entire month. And so they've used the house a little bit, and maybe they have questions, maybe they have a concern. Why don't people follow this process of 2 days, 7 days, 30 days? Why don't agents make outreach to their buyer clients immediately after closing? What are they afraid of?
Maybe like not to smother them, you know, or something like that.
Yeah, I would say err on the side of smother.
Yeah, maybe afraid of complaints after the fact.
Yeah, that's probably right up there as like number 1 on the list. They're afraid that 2 days later, they're going to call and the buyer's going to say, I hate this house. I can't imagine why we ever bought it. And for some reason, real estate agents live in this world of feeling guilty all the time. Right? I think there's a couple of different forms of guilt, right? There's Catholic guilt and Jewish guilt, and I think there's realtor guilt. I think that's one of the forms of guilt that exists, right? Here's what I can tell you. You didn't put a gun to their head to have them purchase the property, right? They bought it under their own volition, and you didn't cause whatever issue is going on, right? So So don't err on the side of not calling, err on the side of over communicating, because if something did go wrong, if like 24 hours after the closing, they moved everything in and the washing machine exploded and ended up on the front lawn, they need you more than ever, right? So the fact that you called to say, hey, you know what? Just wanted to check in. They say, it's been a disaster. This whole washing machine. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad I called. How did you handle that? You should have called me immediately. Do you have a plumber? What else do you need, right? Do you want to come and bring your dirty dishes over to my house? Maybe it's a washing machine, right? Do you want to come and do a load of laundry at my house before the thing gets, right? You can help and offer some additional services and support if in fact there's a problem. So don't hide from that. It's really crazy important. I think I saw somebody, I think it was Eric, who put in the chat, yeah, we closed. I never heard from that person ever again. That is typical, right? That is typical of our industry. Don't have that be you. That's a perfect way never to receive a referral, right? With what Eric knows now, and even before Eric got licensed, I guarantee you in the back of his head, he was thinking, gee, you know what? It's kind of sad that if we ever needed real estate assistance, I'm not sure I would call that person because we were clearly just a paycheck to them. Like never once in a year to call and say, how are things going? You know, it was such a pleasure. Even to call and ask for referrals, right? That's still a touch base.
Yeah, but Rick, we were in a special situation, as you know. We were living in Europe and we came over here. We bought a house like in 1 week. They made 2 offers and bailed out on one after inspection. We bought a house after 1 week. We picked an agent like, I don't know, maybe Redfin or something, right? Sorry for that. Knowing what I know now after Real Estate University and everything you've taught us so far with Ignite, I'd go to Keller Williams.
Yeah, indeed. Woohoo! Right, and so there's a question in the chat. What if they complain about something post moving in as a buyer's agent? What can we do? So here's the answer. You can be sympathetic, you can be supportive, and you can offer resources. Right, those are the 3 things that you can do. Remember, it's not a matter of feeling guilty. It's not your fault, and you don't have a responsibility to fix anything. However, as a client for life, you want to be certain that you are supportive. What was the first thing I said? I can't remember the first thing I said.
Sympathetic.
Thank you. You can be sympathetic, you can be supportive, and then you can be a resource. And so here's what that looks like. I call Margaret and she tells me, you know, something horrible happened. I said, oh my goodness, I am so sorry to hear that. Oh, God, that just like ruins the first week of your new house. I am so sorry. Hey, let me ask you this. How have you addressed the problem? What can I do to help? And Margaret says, well, you know, we've struggled to get a plumber to come and fix, you know, hopefully it's not a chronic like leaking problem, but we've struggled to have a plumber come and actually do the whole fix. Excellent. You know what? I am so glad I called. I have 2 plumbing suggestions for you. And if you need more, I can certainly go to my colleagues and see who else might be available. Maybe Margaret had a plumber who just is totally backed up, right, and didn't think to call me. So now I'm going. I'll always love the script. My goodness, I am so glad I called, right? Because to me it paints me as the guy riding in on the white horse to save the day. Even if Margaret wasn't thinking of me that way, it paints that picture. Right? I am so glad I called. Let me be a resource for you. How else can I assist? Right? And if Margaret says, well, you could come over and, you know, grab a mop, then you use that script I gave you before. Oh, I would love to do that, except that is outside of the scope of what I'm licensed to assist you with. Right? Does that make sense? So again, it's sympathetic, supportive, and a resource, which is ultimately the job post closing. All right, so 2 days, 7 days, and 30 days is your program. If you're a closing gift person, you may want to either deliver the closing gift at closing. I always like to do it post closing, like so that 48-hour piece for me. That 2-day visit wasn't that 2-day check-in wasn't a call. It was a visit. I would come and drop off a closing gift, and then ask how things were going. So the 2-day piece for me was an actual in-person. Some people are scheduling, not right now, but when the health issues start to go away, right? There are some agents who, as the closing gift, do new home parties for their clients, right? You could certainly do a version of that now on Zoom, right? Where you and the buyers are in their new house and you invite all of their friends, like you get a list of all of their friends from them, you invite them to a new home party. And then once they're all on Zoom, you walk around and give them a tour of the house, right? Maybe you know somebody who plays guitar, you could have a song or two played for them. I know some agents who, purposely invite 10 people and it's 10 local people, and they have, before the day before the party, they go and they drop off little goodie bags at each of the houses with a little small thing of champagne and maybe some snacks or whatever. So you can do things from a creating referrals perspective. I love that new home party thing, right? And it can still work today, even though we're not necessarily in an in-person environment just yet, because you could decide to do a Zoom one. Who knows? Some buyers may prefer the Zoom new home party. It's like, I don't have to have all these people come trouncing through my house and then clean it afterwards, right? You just come, you give them a tour. We'll have a little party online. It's shorter. We can do it for 30 to 40 minutes, and then I can go and fall asleep on the couch, right? So Zoom may save some people from having to reject the party because they don't necessarily want the party. It makes it simpler for some. So know that that's an option. Then, of course, place them on your 36 touch program, follow up constantly, and ask for referrals. So there is the anatomy of a buyer transaction. Any comments, questions, concerns, or things that we did not cover in that getting you from writing the offer to the month or so, or the time after the closing period? Nothing? All right, good. That works. So there's one thing left to do. There is one thing left to do, and it is 5:24. So we will not get this done in 35 minutes. So for those of you who can join us tomorrow at 4, we will finish Ignite tomorrow between 4 and 6. For those of you who cannot, we will record it. And so if you want to finish watching the last piece on the recording, that is how I can make that happen for you. And yes, we will finish that in an hour and 40 minutes or so, and we'll leave 20 minutes. Well, we'll finish in about an hour and 30. I'll leave 10 or 12 minutes for questions, and then I'll tell you the cat story and we'll be done. Sound good? So the recordings are all posted by the next morning on our YouTube channel. It's Richfield and Stamford something or other. If anybody knows it, if you can pop the link in the chat, that would be spectacular. So here's how we're going to finish today and then finish up tomorrow. You got yesterday, you got it 2 weeks ago, and then you got it again yesterday, the Mastering the Buyer Consultation scripts, right? Mastering the Buyer Consultation scripts. Those scripts outline a pretty simple and yet relatively comprehensive buyer consult that we will go through starting right now, right? And so if anybody has anybody who doesn't have these scripts, if you can put your email address in the chat, and somebody who does have the scripts from the email yesterday, if you can just watch the chat and push those off, Eric says he can send them to you. So Divya, if you can just put your email address in the chat, we'll get you those scripts. So Mastering the Buyer Consult. Let's spend just a few minutes talking through why a buyer consult. When I say a buyer consult, what am I talking about? Why do you do one, and why is it important? Go ahead, Alex.
Because it's absolutely critical, because I learned this only since coming to Keller, to set very specific expectations of what is going to occur.
Yeah. Guys, remember this. Confrontation and conflict only arises out of unmet expectations. Right? Alex said the exact that word is the reason for the buyer consult. It's all about setting expectations. Setting your expectations with the buyer, setting the buyer's expectations with you, setting the buyer's expectation of the market, setting the buyer's expectation of how long this will take, what the process is, right? All of that. And if you're playing what I call Pop-Tart real estate is, think about a Pop-Tart in a toaster oven, right? So the Pop-Tart is in the toaster oven and is finished, and boing, it pops out of the toaster oven, right? That is how some of us run our real estate businesses. We're sitting around waiting for something to happen, and then our phone rings and someone is in front of a house and says, hey, can you come over and show me this house? And we go, oh, boing, and we pop out of our chair and we grab our keys and we drive over to the house and we meet people at a house who we have no idea who they are. We have no idea if they're qualified. We have no idea if they have an ability to purchase at this level or any level. Right? There's a million different reasons why that's just a bad idea. Starting first and foremost from your safety, right? We haven't vetted these people at all. Instead, the conversation I might have is, so where are you? Excellent. You know what? You're only about 15 minutes from my office. I'm going to need to make a phone call to see if I can get us into that property anyway. Why don't you drive to my office? I will meet you there such that we can have a quick conversation and complete some paperwork while I see if we can get you into that property. Right? Force the consult, force the meet in the office. It is the safe way to do business, and it is also the smart way to do business instead of running and meeting people that you don't have any real relationship with. Now, because I am also practical, are there times where you will do the Pop-Tart real estate version? For most of you, the answer is yes. There will be times where it seems to make sense and it doesn't seem like a risk to capture a client by showing them a property prior to the consult. Again, I don't recommend it. It's not a best practice. And yet there are certain times or experiences where you may find yourself going and doing that. Doesn't make you a bad real estate agent. You just have to decide what your standard is and whether or not you will veer from that standard. Make sense? Yes, Alex.
It doesn't make you a bad agent. It just creates or can create or establish a very dysfunctional dynamic.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly, because remember, you're always modeling behavior. And so if what you've modeled for these particular buyers is, when I call, he leaps out of his chair and runs and does exactly what I want. Well, you've now set that expectation right from the get-go, right? And so is it any wonder why there's conflict later on, right? Excellent point, excellent point. And it's 100% accurate. It's so true. So when you decide that you are going to be a buyer's agent that doesn't work with buyers without a consult first, right? There's appointments and consults. Think about the professionals that you aspire to be like. Right? If you need to see your doctor, you don't decide when the doctor is going to meet you someplace, right? You meet your doctor at the doctor's office at a time that is convenient for them. When you see your accountant, same thing. You don't call your accountant and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to be in the Stop and Shop parking lot. Why don't you meet me in 20 minutes? And whatever paperwork there is, we can always sign it on the trunk of the car. Trust me when I tell you, I have presided over issues and conflicts that arise when we don't do a proper consultation, which means the buyer has not really understood that even if they've signed a quick document on the back of your car, they don't understand that they've actually hired you. You haven't had the consult. That you haven't given them enough. You're standing in the parking lot, or you're standing in a driveway and it's raining. Right? They haven't had an opportunity to digest the contract. And so you put you and them at risk. And then here's what fascinates me. There are some people who do not take a stand and don't do proper consults, I'll sign the paperwork so I'm compliant on the back of the car thing. And then when those same buyers 3 weeks later go and buy at an open house and don't include you, oh, you are miffed. You are fuming. You come to me and say, I have this document. I deserve a commission. And I ask you some questions. Well, talk to me about how that document came to be. Was there a consult? Was there a sit down in the office, and did you go through a proper consult? Well, no. Okay, so help me understand why is it that the buyer should pay for you shortcutting the process? Right? And trust me, guys, for any of you who know me more than 10 minutes, I stand up for you and your rights and your commissions more than probably any broker in the state. I take a hard line on letting people out of contracts. I take very seriously the documents that we have with our clients. But if you're not doing your part, I also have a responsibility to the general public to make sure that they're receiving what they're supposed to receive on their end, right? And so sometimes it's a balancing act. So do your part. Make sure that you're taking a stand and making sure that consultations are your policy, such that we don't run into these issues down the road. Sound good? Oh, and by the way, now's also another my goodness, this is like English as a second language for Rick. This is also another time to remind you that being hired by a buyer prior to you crossing the threshold of properties that are not listed by our brokerage is the law in our state. Like, it's not a strong suggestion. It's not what somebody wrote on a mug or a t-shirt. It's the law. You can't cross the threshold with somebody without written authorization. And so that means that they've hired you or have chosen not to hire you and have done so in writing. And then we have to have a different conversation. We'll talk about that tomorrow. All righty, so let's take a half step back and start from the perspective of you've done your lead generation, you've held your open houses, or you're prospecting for referrals. Somehow or other, you get a lead that says, I am interested in purchasing a property, right? Awesome. And so you're going to set that first appointment for the buyer consult. I'm often asked how long the buyer consult is. I'm often asked, or was often asked by clients, right? So I'm going to meet you on Saturday at 10 o'clock. Are we just going to go out and see houses? Well, yes, we'll have a short consult first, and then we will head out and see a couple of properties. Well, how long is the consult? 20 to 30 minutes longer if you have questions. That was my answer. 20 to 30 minutes longer if you have questions. Because here's the thing, if you're doing the consult well, it doesn't take more than 30 minutes. They almost always have some questions. And so it's anywhere from that 30 to 40 sometimes. And yet if it's longer than that, my guess is that you've probably now lost them. Because here's what's real. They come to you for one reason. And it's not to sit and listen to you talk about the paperwork. They come to you because they want to go out and see property. So I'm not discounting the consult. I just said that you should do it as 100% of the time as you can possibly do it. However, you also need to recognize that having a short, powerful consult is far better than droning on and on and on for an hour and 20 minutes, because now you have people who want to put a gun in their mouth instead of get in the car and go see property, right? It's nothing personal. Just remember, they come to you for that. It's about the houses. It's not about you. The consult, by the way, is also not about you. The consult's 110% about them. So think about the experience they have if they come and you spend all this time talking at them for way longer than they want. And I have seen some people then say, you know what, we've actually run out of time. We can't see houses today. Yeah, that doesn't work. Or you have a short consult that's 100% focused on them and their needs, and then move to seeing property right away. There's clearly one that's what they're looking for and one that's not. Make sense? All righty. So let's do this. What is the time? Oh my goodness, we got time, baby. We got time. We get through at least the first two steps. So step number one is called setting the stage. It's very similar to the listing side setting the stage that we did, in that hey, let me ask you this. I'm suddenly feeling like we might have gone through part of this buyer consultation. Did we? Margaret is saying yes. Did we get through all of it? I don't think we did.
We did. We definitely did.
So we started this. So that, yeah, because this setting the stage is clearly familiar, and I think the needs analysis also. Huh. Well, look at that. Did we get through? Well,
We got to the paperwork.
we did, didn't we? So we got through all of this, and then we didn't do the actual paperwork, right? We didn't do the actual document. So let me ask this.
We did this one.
Yeah, how many of you attended the separate session I did on this document that Friday, right? Because I did a session where we went through the listing contract and the buyer contract. A lot of you were in that, and it was recorded, right? We did do the needs analysis, because as I'm sitting here running through this, I can remember having these conversations with you all. So very interesting. Okay, well. So for those of you who don't remember this conversation, I am going to tonight into tomorrow find the session that we recorded on it and just verify it, right? And push that out to you, because if for some reason maybe you were there or only there for half of it, but all of a sudden I'm feeling like it's like deja vu all over again, right? Because we definitely had most if not all of this conversation. And so here's my thought. We can get through a couple of quick questions, and I can give you my cat story, and we can finish tonight. What questions do you have that we maybe didn't cover, or that are burning a hole in your brain that would make sense for us to cover? I do need, we have about 4 minutes for a good question or two, and then I'll spend the next 15 or 18 minutes telling you my cat story, and then we'll be done. Go ahead, Alex.
So I hope you haven't covered this. Tell me if you have. Moving from shopping to buying.
And tell me what you mean by that exactly.
Well, I think you and I even had a conversation about a client of mine who insisted on shopping and seeing absolutely everything, because I had not consulted enough with her to move her from the shopping mode to the purchasing mode, even though she was entirely qualified.
Got it. Yes, and I do remember that that conversation. And so here's what I would say. a lot of that is done through the consultation process, in which we're kind of dropping clues all along, right? My script to move people from consultation into the shopping mode may help moving from shopping to buying, right? So my script with the very first time I'm out with anybody, my script after they've hired me and we finished the consult and we're headed out to see the first few properties is, so Mr. and Mrs. New Buyer, just as a foundational discussion, most of the buyers that I work with find the home that they purchase within the first 8 to 12 properties we see. I tell you that because sometimes buyers see a home that they really love and it's number 1 or 2, and for some reason think that for some reason they shouldn't purchase that because they need to go see 97 other ones first, right? I'm here to tell you that most of my clients purchase within the first 8 to 12 homes, and some the first time we're out, right? And so it's just setting the expectation so that people don't think, because sometimes people think they have to look at 47 houses, not because they read a book that said that, it's just what they think. And so if we don't change their thinking or set a different expectation up front, we sometimes run into an issue where they're never out of the shopping mode, right? The other way to help move them from shopping mode to buying mode is to absolutely utilize that top 5 must-have list that we went over, right? So that top 5 must-have list, that has their important pieces on it, the top 5 things they're looking for in a house. And so when you are at a house with them and it has their top 5 must-haves, here's what that script looks like, right? So I'm showing Alex this property, right? And I'm noticing that it has meets all of her criteria. About halfway through the house, I think I would stop and haul that page out, which is always in my folder, and say, "Oh, Alex, stop! Wait a minute! Look how exciting! I just took out your top 5 must-have list, and this house seems to have all 5. I'm curious. Let's finish checking out this property, and I think maybe that might prompt a conversation about an offer. Like, what do you think?" I'm going to help her realize and recognize that it's okay to finally make a decision. I'm not sure what it is about some buyers who feel like they need our permission to stop the shopping process, but sometimes people do. And so by setting some expectations and then having the conversation around the top 5 must-have that, because we had it in the consultation. I just want to, here's how I work. When we find a property that seems to meet your criteria, that is going to prompt a conversation between you and I about the possibility of making an offer. I'm setting that expectation right up front so that when I stop Alex in the middle of the house and say, oh my goodness, like this one might be it. Look, I just hauled it out. It has this, check, 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 and check. And it's on more land than you thought. It's like a bonus. It's like the top 6. Right? And so I'm helping her recognize that this house meets her criteria. Does that make sense? Oui, madame.
So could you talk a little around buyers that change their criteria in the process?
Yes. So my recommendation is if you're out with a buyer past that 12 house metric, right? So again, most buyers buy between 8 and 12 houses. If you're now into the house 14, house 16, house 19, version, my advice to you is prior to going out again, we have another sit-down meeting. We have a check-in consultation. And so the check-in looks something like this. So Alex, do me a favor. We have our first appointment at 10:30 on Saturday morning to see a few properties that you've outlined you'd like to see. Let's set our appointment for 10 o'clock. I'd like to just have a check-in to make sure that we're both still on the same page. And then when Alex arrives at 10 o'clock, I'll simply ask some questions. Want to just check motivation, right? Are we still all on the same page from a time frame and what you're looking for? Has anything changed since the last time we met? I'm curious, are the top 5 must-haves still your top 5? I'm curious, has your timing changed? I'm curious, the job that you were starting, which is the whole reason you're moving here, are you still starting that job? Like, has anything changed in your world? Right? If you're not checking in and asking some of these additional questions every couple of weeks, my experience tells me that oftentimes buyers will not proactively tell you something has changed. I can't address why. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they just don't think it's important. Maybe they're lonely and they like spending time with you every Saturday and Sunday, right? I say that kind of haha as a joke, except it's not really haha as a joke. There are some people who are looking for a friend, not a house, right? And so you helping people make those decision points and walking them forward at some point gets you to a point of saying, okay, you know what? I'm not sure where else to go with having this person make a decision. And then you may need to have a sit down that says that, right? Based on the last 3 months of us spending time together, I'm concerned there's a mismatch between the motivation that you're stating and the results. And I just want to be certain, don't never blame them, you back on you. I want to be certain that I'm serving you at a high level, because I know how it is to truly desire to want to purchase a home and then not do that. So I'm curious, makes sense for us to maybe pull back a little bit from our search to ease that frustration, or to revisit the parameters and make different decisions about what it is you're looking for and what it is you may accept, such that we can get to the finish line. See, to me, nothing wrong with having a conversation that talks about moving people forward faster. A lot of you won't do that because you think it sounds like you're rushing people. And again, I don't think it sounds like we're rushing people, because I've already set the expectation, 8 to 12. That's what it takes most people to buy a house, right? Eric came here, he was here for 2.5 days. He saw however many houses and he bought a house, right? He didn't shop for 97 different houses. He knew what he wanted. He worked with the real estate agent who didn't follow up with him, but at least he worked with somebody who actually listened to what he said, showed him properties that met his criteria, and he chose one. I will tell you, there are more people like Eric out there than many of you believe. And what that really says is not anything about the buyers, but it says everything about how you're conducting your time with your buyers, right? That's a you conversation, not a buyer's conversation. Because when you set different expectations with your buyers up front, you can shortcut this process. Trust me, they love you for it. Because there's nothing more frustrating than someone who says, I want to buy a house, and then believes, based on whatever facts they're choosing, believes that there's just no way for them to get there. Make sense? I hope that answered that. Any other questions from a content perspective? I don't want to short you on content. Okay, if that's the case, so I have 9 minutes. I cannot tell my cat house story in 9 minutes. So I am going to run over a little bit, probably by 5 or 6 minutes. If you're interested in the cat house story, you may have to decide to stay for 5 or 6 more minutes. If not, I will make sure that the recording keeps going. You can certainly watch it on the playback. This is a story about with 2 kind of morals. The first moral of the story is, I never met a house I didn't like, right? The second moral to the story is, you sometimes can't believe how stupid a smart person can actually be. And so let me tell you why I said that. I got a call, and I'll tell it as quickly as I possibly can. I got a call from I was farming an area down in South Ridgefield, and I got a call from someone who said, "Can you come and check out my house?" I said, "Sure." It was down on Silverbrook Road. I drove past it. It was this dumpy little ranch that was all overgrown and all kind of nasty. I had this appointment. I'm like, oh, okay, you know what? It's kind of one of those like POS houses, you know, POS. Think about it, it'll come to you, right? And so I thought, okay, well, you know, it'll maybe be a fast sale. I can maybe sell it to one of my builders. We'll figure out this. The land was an acre of flat property in South Ridgefield and was gorgeous, right? Piece of sunshine. That's exactly right, Eric. I love you for that. So I make the appointment, and this guy cancels the appointment on me 3 different times. 3 different times. So I'm starting to get the hint that either serious or there was something else going on. So I have when he called to cancel the 3rd time, I said to him, "Look, is there something you're not telling me?" And he said, "You know what? I'm kind of embarrassed about walking you through the property." And I said, "I do this for a living. You called a professional. No worries. Let's keep the appointment for tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and we'll get this done." Great. So it was like in the summer, bright sun. I show up, I ring the doorbell, and nothing happens. And so there's a screen door with no screen, with a wooden door behind it. And so I reach through the screen door and do knock, knock, knock on the wood door, and wait, still nothing. I thought, okay, well, now I'm being stood up. So I knock a little harder on the wood door, and some man, short, shirtless, flings open the door and screams at me, "What the do you want?" I'm here to see, I don't care. Boom, and he slams the door in my face. I thought, looking back now, that was a sign. I should have just understood the sign, right, and walked away. So I thought, well, you know what? I've tried 3 times to get into this house. This is bizarre. So I knock again. This time, a different person opens the door. Someone with a shirt on, taller, who says, "Oh, hi, are you Rick?" "Yes, I'm Rick. Are you?" I forget his name now. Are you Steve?" "Yes." "So great." He says, "I am so sorry that, you know, that was my roommate, unstable." "Yeah, you think?" He said he's kind of in the doorway, and I said to him, "Okay, so step number 1 is, why don't you give me a quick tour of the house?" He says, "Okay, why don't you step in?" So I step into the house, and this is the part where I get to say to you, everything I'm about to tell you is not made up. Everything I'm about to tell you is exactly how it happened, the way it happened. Cross my heart, hope to die, honestly. So I step into the house, I step away from the door, and David, his name was David, it wasn't Steve, it was David, pushes the door closed as he's talking to me, saying, you know, "I'm so sorry that I canceled a bunch of appointments." And as he's pushing the door closed, what I'm realizing is that the last little slivers of light into this house are getting shorter, like smaller and smaller as he's closing the door. So he finally closes the door, and I'm standing there now in what is like, with him talking, I can barely even see him now, thinking, okay, well, this is odd. And so I said, you know, again, we're going to take a quick tour of the house, have my little, right, like every good real estate agent, quick tour of the house. You could kind of just lead the way. And I wonder, and before I could say, like, maybe some lights would be good, he says, "Okay, well, why don't we start this way?" I'm like, okay. So he goes off this way, and I'm looking kind of after him, and my eyes are now adjusting to the dark, and I'm noticing that it's kind of walking across what seems to be a living room. Again, it's a small ranch, so it's kind of a circle of rooms. Living room, and I'm seeing like little slivers of light from where things are pulled down from the windows, because again, it's bright sunny outside. And as my eyes are adjusting to the light, I see him walking across the living room kind of oddly, and I think, like, what is with this guy? Why is it dark? What am I doing here, right? So I think, okay, you know what? Be a professional. Let's just go. We'll take the tour of the house. How bad could it be? And so I start to go across the hardwood floor living room area from the doorway, and I'm suddenly realizing why he was walking so bizarrely, because he's stepping around what seemed to be like little puddles. I'm thinking like, so now I'm walking kind of bizarrely, walking around these puddles. I'm thinking, what is going on? And what is that noise? And as I'm walking across the room, hearing something I couldn't quite place, I'm starting to recognize that the entire room is like moving. And again, my eyes are still adjusting to the dark, so I couldn't quite figure out why the whole room was moving. And as I'm halfway across the living room, I now start to figure it out. There are cats everywhere. The cats are on the couch, they're on the floor, they're on the dresser, they're on the credenza. I mean, cats everywhere. And so I'm now figuring out, like, okay, P.S. As I'm walking across, when I stepped in, clearly I could tell that there was an odor to the house. As I'm walking across the living room now, it's getting worse and worse. And so I have my hand, it was like, okay, how am I going to survive this? Right? I didn't want to be rude and say, oh my goodness, I'm going to pee the house because it stinks. Because I did want the listing, of course. So I now have 2 fingers up under my nose. I'm walking across, doing my whole thing across. He's turning on lights now over in the dining room area, a little lamp. So now at least there's some more light. And I get across the room, and sure enough, yes, I was right. It's cats everywhere doing their cat thing with their tails, and they're purring, and they're shaking, and they're peeing, and they're thinking. And so I'm following David. I'm asking, I'm trying to behave like normal. He walks me from the living room into the dining room area. Again, small little ranch, so everything's connected. And says, well, it's sense for us to sit down and have a conversation. And I thought, oh, no, I'm all fine. No sitting necessary. It didn't matter because there were cats on the dining room table. There were cats on the chairs. There were cats and cats and cats everywhere. So I'm asking, trying to maintain some level of composure. He says, well, let's keep going. We moved from the dining room into the kitchen now. Right now, we're kind of completing the circle around the house into the kitchen. He stops and says, can I get a drink? And I thought, oh, really, truly, and honestly, no, that is no problem. I think I would rather be dehydrated and near death before I drank from anything that was in your house, which of course I didn't say. But I'm noticing now, again, as I'm walking through the kitchen, because now he's turned some lights on in the kitchen, there are cats on the counters. There's a cat in the sink. There are cats in the cabinetry is open. There are cats sitting next to the plates, cats sitting on the plates, cats in the pantry, cats. Guys, I'm not kidding when I tell you there had to be 100 or more cats in this small little house. Every kind of cat you could possibly imagine. I'm taking notes. We passed the kitchen. We go into the bathroom. I'm looking in. Cats in the tub. Cats in the sink again. Cats everywhere. I'm taking notes. And now we're to the other end of the house. And so I'm making a left to go back to the front door area. And there are 3 doors along that hallway. And so he opens the first one, and this massive plume of smoke comes out. Like I had to duck this massive plume of smoke. And he says, oh, well, this is my roommate's room. Do you need to go in? And I thought, well, I should at least see what the room looks like. Again, how a smart person could be so stupid is beyond me. And yet, so I step into the room, and if you've ever seen an episode of Hoarders, this bedroom was like an episode of Hoarders. There was one little path to get to the bed where this man with his huge big beard, like Santa Claus, was chain smoking. When I tell you he was smoking 3 cigarettes at one time, watching some game show on the television, saying, oh, hi, yeah, hi, how you doing? Yeah, make yourself at home, whatever you need. There were stacks of newspapers and books and clothes, both clean and dirty. Again, one little said, you know what, thank you very much. I have my notes. I appreciate it. Great. So out of that room. We get to the next room. This is now David's room, the one who's walking me around, opens it up. no smoke, but the same kind of like hoarder mentality where there's one little that you could walk in the room and then everything else just stacked, as taller than my head high with just junk and crap and whatever. The last room, of course, now if you remember where we started this story with the shirtless man screaming at me, the last room was his room. So that door gets open. He's still in there. He's still shirtless and he's still rude and nasty. What the f are you people? Get out, get out. And so then down there having a conversation or at least an argument back and forth, right? You know what, thank you. I'm so sorry. Sorry to bother you. Have what I need. Thank you so much. We close the door. We get back to the front door. I think, okay, I survived. I made it through the whole house. I survived. Get to the front door and David says to me, is there anything else you need? Now I'm inches from the front door, right? And did you ever see a horror movie where like somebody says, well, gee, what should we do? And someone says, I don't know, maybe we should go hide in the garage with all of the power tools, right? Like the stupidest decisions ever. So he says to me, is there anything else you need? Now, I told you what I did for a walkthrough when we had this conversation 2 weeks ago. And what I told you was, I was the guy who made sure he saw the entire house. And so instead of saying, no, please open the door so I can escape, I said, brilliant realtor that I am, I said, well, I really should see the basement. So, okay. He says, oh, okay, no problem. So we walk back through the living room, around the little puddles, back around the dining room, into the kitchen, and there the basement door is in the kitchen. Cats everywhere, it still stinks, it's still nasty, the whole 9 yards. And so this is the part, so you haven't heard the worst of it yet, right? So that's the scary part of the story, because it gets actually worse from here. We get to the top of the basement stairs, and Dave's behind me. He reaches around me and opens the door inward. Like the door doesn't open the proper way, right? It opens into the steps. So now I'm standing at the top of the steps. He's behind me, opens the door. So if there was ever an opportunity to push me down the stairs and lock me in, right? Like Kathy Bates in Misery, that this would have been it. Now that did not happen. But what did happen, and I'm not making this up, what did happen is he said, you know what, Rick, the light's on the left-hand side. Can you just switch the light on? So I kind of feel over, I find the light and I flip the light switch on. Now, if any of you have ever either lived in a city apartment or seen a movie where someone lives in a city apartment, every once in a while, even if you're crazy clean, right? Sometimes you switch the light on, and you know how like sometimes like a bug might scurry or a roach might scurry? Well, I flipped the light on, and what I see at the bottom of the stairs was something much larger than a bug scurry across the floor. And I stopped for a moment and thought to myself, okay, that looked like a child. And so I start walking down the stairs and get to the bottom of it. At the bottom of the stairs, there's like this makeshift, like all these 2x4s that I see from the outside. And there's like sort of sheetrock and some sheets and whatnot on the inside. So like almost like a makeshift room down there. And so so Dave says to me, you know what, there's a little break in the action over here. So I kind of squeezed through the 2x4s into this room, and sitting in this room on the left-hand side is a woman stirring she's stirring a pot of something on a little like a hot plate. And across the room on the right is this 2, maybe 3-year-old little girl who's down there with her. So when I saw something scurry across the room in the dark, when I turned the light on, it was a small child. And so now I'm looking at these people. I'm like, okay, like what notes do I write about this? And so I turn and look at Dave, and he says, oh, well, these are my other tenants. Like, oh, okay, tenants in basement, right? Like whatever that note is for. And so I said, how are you? Thank you. They didn't speak much English. And so I just kind of smiled and said, whatever. And you could see that there was like a makeshift, like a little bed area over there. But these people apparently lived down in this basement. Why they were in the dark, Georgia, I still have absolutely no idea. No clue why she was sitting in the dark, stirring on her hot plate. Maybe she had a flashlight. Maybe, I don't know what was going on there. And so I said, okay. He said, well, anything else? And I said, well, I really should see the mechanicals. Like, if this wasn't enough, I'm asking for more. Like, what I probably should have said is, clearly, I haven't made it clear to you that I am absolutely here to be killed, kidnapped, or maimed. And so if you could please just get it over with and either kill, kidnap, or maim me so I can be finished here, because I just kept asking for it, right? So the idea of this little room, he says, okay, well, the mechanicals are back through there. So we kind of go across the room and squeeze through the 2x4s again. And now we're walking into another dark area with only a small basement window across the way with light coming in. And so I'm now kind of seeing having that same issue of not being able to see exactly what was in the room. And so Dave's behind me telling me, oh, the furnace is over there, and we have some water thing over there. And so I'm looking at trying to see what the thing is. I said, well, are there lights? And he said, no, there's not really great light in here. It's, but you can see it over there. And my eyes are getting used to what I'm seeing. And I kept being distracted by looking at the mechanicals for what I was seeing over here on the left. And in this room on the left, did you ever see the movie Alien with the really big eggs that sit there? When someone walks in the room, they open, right? And the little thing comes out and attaches to your face. Well, I'm standing there thinking, okay, why would there be alien eggs in this ranch basement in South Ridgefield? And I could swear I'm staring at these alien eggs. Like, that's all that's in my head at this point. Like, what is that? Well, as my eyes continued to adjust, what I realized they were not alien eggs, believe it or not alien eggs, but large bags of open kitty litter, like bags like as tall as my hip of kitty litter. And just beyond the alien egg kitty litter bags was this kiddie pool, this big plastic kiddie pool, where apparently at certain times of the day, all the cats kind of came downstairs and used the kitty litter pool in the basement. And so all the bags where someone came and cleaned out the kitty litter and just put the waste in the bags, and then the bags just stayed there, right next to where this family was living in this basement. Holy Christmas Eve. So finally, we finish, we go back upstairs, we go back out on the front porch. I'm now out. Clearly I made it. And he says to me, what do you think? And I said, well, let me ask you this. Is it really your thought that anyone could or should be inside of the house? And he said, no. He said, but what are my options? And I said, well, you have lots of options, right? The option number one is we can put the property on the market as land and not encourage showings. Number two, we can put it on as a knockdown and just let people know that it's unsafe to go in the house, right? So here's the thing. At the end of that day, I put that property on the market. I listed that ranch for about $262,000. Got full price. I sold it to one of my own builders who I was working with for full price. Got both sides of that. So that was $50,000. And that builder knocked it down and built a $1.2 million house on it. And Dave and the Santa Claus guy, the chain smoking Santa Claus guy, I actually sold that. They needed a place to live. I sold them and 3 cats. I don't know what happened to the other 97, but I sold the 2 of them with 3 cats a property on Franklin Street in Danbury for like $197,000. So when you add up, I mean, so the moral of the story, as I said to you in the beginning, I never met a listing I didn't like. I never had a house I didn't like. that property was really good to me. Now, at the same time, I do not have any expectation that any of you would ever be as stupid as I was, right? And yet it didn't feel like stupidity at the time. It felt like a challenge to be professional in circumstances that I wasn't prepared with. So the real reason I tell you this story is to help you see that you need to kind of be prepared for anything, right? Part of our job is to go into people's homes, right? And so being prepared for people to say or ask or do almost anything is kind of one of the requirements of being a good real estate agent. Knowing when you might be in danger and excusing yourself from that scenario, unlike what I just explained to you, right? Although I have to say, I never felt like I was in danger. I never felt scared. It all seemed very safe. It felt gross, and I couldn't answer some of the questions as to what I was seeing, but I never felt unsafe, right? And so to wrap up that story, yes, Margaret, I ran as quickly as I possibly could home and I think I took 2 showers, right? Because I got out of one, dried myself off and thought, no, I don't think that was enough. Let's get back in, right? People oftentimes ask me what happened to the cats and what happened to the family in the basement. The shirtless screaming man. I don't know the answer to any of those questions. It's one of those mysteries where I guess once the property was sold, they just kind of moved on to someplace else. But that's the cat house story. So I hope it was enjoyable. I hope I got it done in. All right, it took a little more time than I needed, but thank you for staying around, guys. I hope that this whole run of Ignite has been helpful to you. I've really enjoyed spending time with you. You guys have been awesome. There's been a lot of groups in the last couple of years, and you guys were not only the largest, but certainly one of the more engaged groups that we've had. And so I think that bodes really well for your career. So we will not meet tomorrow, right? We are now done for this session. For those of you who missed any sessions, I will be starting Ignite all over again, middle to third week of March. I'm still working on the exact timing of it all. So if you're looking to start up again, if you're looking to take the class again, some stuff is the same, some stuff is different. The cat house story is almost always the same. And yet, I encourage you to plug in, even if you only choose to plug into pieces of it, to just kind of refresh your memory. I wish you the best I wish you the best of activity, right? Because I don't really wish you the best of luck. Business people don't need luck; they need activity. They need consistency and they need focus. So I wish you the best of activity. You know what the activities you need to do are. You know where to focus. You know how to do a lot more than you think you might know how to do. Have faith and confidence in yourself. Do remember that if for any reason you have little confidence in something you're about to do, know that I have more confidence in you than maybe you do at that moment, and just borrow some of the confidence that I have in you from me for that time to kind of get you through. Give it back, because I do want to hold it in reserve for in case you need it again down the road. But you'll do awesome. And so let's just use this as a launching pad to a 2021. That whether you're brand new to the industry or relaunching or restarting or reconnecting or anything, right? Start from today, focus on activities, be consistent about what you do, and then drive yourself to a goal of a certain number of appointments every single week. And that, I promise you, if you will focus on just that, will bring you everything that you want. Guys, it's been my pleasure to spend time with you. I look forward to seeing you around. We do have our call tomorrow at 9 o'clock, which most of you are on anyway, so I'll see you then. Thank you for your time and attention. Take care. Love you.
Rick.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for everything. I'll see you. Bye, everybody.
Roberto.
Hello.
Hi.